Well, baby, you're so beautiful. I wanna be your man. I wanna kiss you loads of times and hold your f***ing hand. But your father doesn't like me. Your father don't approve. Well, ask him if he'll fight me. Cause I'm in love with Joe Roshane. I wanna fight your father. Ooh, ooh. Hey everybody, my name is Ian Garcia, this is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary, a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up-and-coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them in my humble opinion. It's been a while since I was able to cram in a double feature from the new releases of last weekend, but the pickings as far as at least semi-limited releases into the major multiplex chains actually turned out to be pretty fortuitous. I'm well aware that the major releases were pretty limited in and of themselves. Likely a lot of the majors aren't looking to compete this soon in the waning weeks of the summer movie season, with Deadpool and Wolverine casting its long shadow and with Twisters doing some really impressive numbers despite being an utter piece of crap. In an alternate timeline, I probably would have just bitten the bullet to show out for my man M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. I've been especially looking forward to that, especially because Knock at the Cabin turned out to be one of my favorite US films of last year. But no, I decided to take advantage of the surprisingly tantalizing independent and foreign release offerings this week and saw two films. The first, Kneecap, a music biopic presenting a semi-fictionalized account of the formation of the Northern Irish hip-hop trio of the same name, starring the members of the group, and then second, Coup, a satirical dark comedy starring Peter Sarsgaard as a low-life cook who takes a job in a mansion of a wealthy progressive journalist during the 1918 influenza pandemic and sets about undermining him. Let's kick things off with Kneecap, and in honor of the occasion, I did decide to Irish my drink choice up a bit. Oh my god, that is way stronger than I intended to make it. And if you're wondering, no, that this is not a joke about how all Irish people are, drunken reprobates who love nothing more than to throw beer and whiskey down their gullets. No, this is not what this is in reference to. Because as anyone really knows, what the Irish are really into is cocaine and ketamine. And right out of the gate, I'll make this clear. I had no idea who Kneecap were, as much as I suspect that most movie watchers and music listeners outside of the United Kingdom share in my ignorance, and I'm a knave in general as far as it concerns UK hip-hop, much less Irish or Northern Irish hip-hop. The only Irish hip-hop R&B I'm familiar with is Rubber Bandits, and that's pretty far away from what a group like Kneecap is going for it. F*** your Honda Civic, I have a horse outside. Your Subaru, I have a horse outside. So just a dry run recap and many apologies in advance for all the Irish names I'm about to butcher. Kneecap are a Northern Irish hip-hop trio from Belfast that formed in 2017. The members are Liam O'Gahane, who goes by Mochara, second vocalist Nishi O'Carlin, whose stage name is Mowgli Bap, and DJ Prove, real name JJ O. Dakarta. And this film basically presents a highly condensed, and being that I'm not terribly familiar with the band and having to do a lot of last-minute research, I can only hazard a confident guess that Kneecap also presents a highly stylized and embellished version of the group's formation and quite recent history, all occurring against the backdrop of the Irish language movement, which was a popular political movement that pushed for the formal legal recognition of the Irish language as a national language in Northern Ireland, equal to English at a time in which vernacular usage of Irish was close to socially extinct in Northern Ireland. And obviously that background itself is also heavily informed by the spirit of Irish republicanism and independence politics, with our characters being framed as part of the Peace Babies generation, those of the Zoomer generation of Northern Ireland, born very close to or after the Good Friday agreements that marked the formal conclusion of the Troubles, the 30 years political conflict between radical Irish Republicans and independents, and on the other side, Unionists that favored Northern Ireland's remaining a part of the United Kingdom. This civil conflict, of course, ravaged Northern Ireland for decades with paramilitary and terroristic violence that our characters themselves didn't directly experience. But the legacy of which they have still inherited and which informs a large part of the youth counterculture of which they are a part as young Irish speakers, from antisocial tendencies to illicit drug use and hedonism to, on the other hand, a prevailing spirit of Irish republicanism and favoritism for Northern Irish independence, and especially, in linguistic terms, the preservation of the Irish language. That's basically how we're introduced to Mochara and Mowgli Bap, as these hard-partying young drug dealers whose youth culture, whose fashion and preference for music is heavily informed by African American and street culture, especially hip-hop music, but who are nonetheless also these semi-romantic young men, both being raised in homes in which their parents taught them to speak fluent Irish and to thumb their noses at British rule. Bap's own father, Arlo, played by none other than Michael Fassbender, was even a Republican paramilitary responsible for several car bombings in Belfast before he was compelled to flee arrest and go into hiding, while still maintaining a very estranged relationship with his son, whose irresponsible and hedonic tendencies he chastises. So early in the movie, Chara and Bap are at an illegal rave party in the woods that gets broken up by the police. Chara encourages Bap to flee while he stays behind and gets arrested. This is when we rope in DJ Prove, then portrayed as simply JJ Odakarta, a mild-mannered, middle-aged music teacher who himself was once an aspiring musician who at one time wanted to use his art to promote Irish independence and the preservation of the Irish language, but is now just sort of whittling his time away living with his girlfriend Caitlin, played by Fionnuala O'Flaherty, who herself is an activist and staunch voice in the Irish language movement. One day, Dakarta is called into the police station to serve as a translator for none other than Chara, who is being kept overnight in the jail because he refuses to speak English to his interrogators. When the chief investigator, Detective Ellis, played by Josie Walker, asks Dakarta to translate a book of Chara's notes, believing them to be evidence of his drug dealing and other illicit activities, Dakarta is amazed to realize that Chara is a rapper, but who not only raps in the Irish language, but has adapted new slang to the Irish vernacular in order to describe contemporary peace baby youth culture and themes. Dakarta manages to help Chara get off the hook from the worst charges against him and is inspired to bring out his old mixing equipment and help Chara and Bap record an independent single, allegedly the first hip-hop track recorded in Northern Ireland in contemporary Irish vernacular. From there, the group, which Chara ironically names Kneecap, gradually becomes a local word-of-mouth sensation, Dakarta becoming a reluctant third member of the band, all the while hiding his identity behind the DJ Prove moniker in order to protect his regular job, but also to hide his activities from his girlfriend Caitlin, who, as the group increasingly courts controversy for the content of their lyrics, which not only refer to antisocial behaviors, illicit drug use, and dealing explicit sexual references, but also rather cavalierly appropriates slogans and language of radical Irish Republicans. Basically, Caitlin, despite being in favor, as the group is, of promoting Irish, thinks they're giving the Irish language movement a bad name in the press and are making the movement easy targets for conservative voices who oppose the equal legal recognition of Irish alongside English. And then, going along with that controversy from the other side of things, there's still also lingering elements of would-be Irish radical Republicans and paramilitary gangs who hate Kneecap for a very different reason. Because these are a bunch of young kids who had no direct experience of the Troubles appropriating the language and imagery of Northern Irish radicalism, all the while rapping in a heterodox vernacular, wearing a heterodox fashion, and seemingly romanticizing youth drug culture and bragging about their status as drug dealers, which more conservative Irish nationalists definitely do not like. So as their music becomes more popular among the peace baby hip-hop counterculture, they also end up in the sights of lingering would-be Irish Republican gangs who would like to make their Kneecap name not so ironic, which is to say, Kneecap is literally a reference to kneecapping, which is a punitive practice commonly used by Irish paramilitaries to terrorize drug dealers by literally crippling them with gunshots to the knees and legs. But that's sort of where Kneecap as a real-life band is coming from, this sort of strange, heterodox paradox generational position they're in, where on the one hand, they really do seem to quite earnestly espouse these politics of Irish nationalism and cultural preservation, but at the same time approaching it through this very typically postmodern, semi-satiric, but ironical veil in which they're kind of forced to acknowledge both an affinity for a previous generation of militant nationalism, but also a generational alienation from it. This idea that, not unlike the birth of hip-hop from the ashes of the Black Power movements of the 60s and 70s, this new youth counterculture is being born into a context where the horizon of militant opposition to colonial rule has failed. It was both politically defeated while also collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, leaving this succeeding generation to try to sift through the rubble and find a way to adapt the same spirit to a new socio-political context, and not really having a lot of guidance about how to do so. And that's probably a lot of big word salad, and I think what I like so much about Kneecap as a movie is the way it is, to some extent, just a music biopic, just an extension of the band and its music and art, but at the same time, by embellishing upon details of the band's journey from obscurity to hometown heroes, manages to make itself this rather effective allegory for Northern Ireland, and especially Northern Irish youth culture in this period of flux, of finding some way to mediate all of that alienation, that sense of the horizons of radical history being foreclosed and needing to find some other way to express a sense of defiance and national and cultural pride. And what makes it more interesting, and what seems to make Kneecap so much more than just a music biopic, more than just a band movie, is the way in which writer-director Rich Pepiot, in collaborating with the band on the story for the film, actually does a really good job of incorporating the story of the band and these sort of embellished, outsized characters that they portray in the movie, these embellished versions of themselves, incorporating them as kind of part of the satire, where, for lack of a better way of putting it, the movie kind of portrays these guys as very passionate, but also kind of dumb, libidinal assholes. This isn't like Straight Outta Compton, where the story of this one band takes center stage and centralizes the entirety of a cultural and political movement in a certain time and place in the universe of that movie. If anything, I think what makes Kneecap such a great film, just as far as a satiric comedy drama, is that it kind of keeps reinforcing all the time that, if anything, the whole point is that Kneecap are the background characters. They are these marginal figures in an overall socio-political movement, and especially in terms of their antagonism with the sort of remnant gangs of radical Republicans and Bap's estranged relationship with his father, Arlo. The whole point of the movie becomes kind of about how these guys are embraced symbolically as real participants in a broader socio-political movement. Rather than creating something, they're just sort of organically, ribosomically within this broader thing that is occurring, and they are accepted just as much as they create parts of it. Like, I think it's very telling that basically the third major music performance sequence, where Kneecap is just playing their second gig at a local pub, I think it's very telling that Pepiot and the band decided to portray them as these guys who accidentally take a bunch of ketamine before they go on stage, and while the soundtrack is playing their song, the actual context of the performance is clearly just this inebriated disaster, with everyone in the crowd just kind of looking on like, what the is this shit? Before they win everyone over by just tossing baggies of drugs into the crowd, which of course only makes them and the band look worse in the public eye and kind of lends credence to what Caitlin says about them as just these sorts of nihilists who don't really believe in anything, who don't even seem to really believe in doing what they need to do to give a good performance, who aren't really a part of anything constructive or holistic in the community. As a matter of fact, as far as the allegorical nature of the film, I have a sneaking suspicion that Caitlin is actually supposed to be a stand-in for the real-life Irish language movement activist Linda Irving, who was both an Irish language advocate but also a unionist. So that's one of these sorts of references to broader heterodox political complications that the filmmakers are making in allegorical terms with their film that might not quite translate to audiences outside of Northern Ireland or the United Kingdom. I think it's actually quite tantalizing the way some critics have responded to the film's depiction of what is possibly embellished, but from my understanding of UK nightlife culture in general, is a fairly accurate representation of the rather rampant consumption of illicit drugs. Where I was even reading this one review where the author was praising the film for sort of allegorically showing how this rampant drug use is sort of a symptom of the inherited trauma of the Troubles, whereas in the movie itself, there's this whole sequence in which Bap and Chara go to one physician after another, repeating all the same bromides about how they need this prescription to medicate for all this trauma they feel, but where obviously the whole point is, no, these guys aren't doing drugs because of trauma. These kids aren't doing drugs because of trauma. They're doing drugs because doing drugs is fun to do, and there's nothing else to do in Belfast but party and do drugs. And then the sequence is all capped off with Chara basically explaining to one physician that he really gets off on shouting Republican terroristic slogans as he reaches orgasm in bed, which then leads into the subplot about his relationship to this Ulster Protestant girl named Georgia, played by Jessica Reynolds, where they sort of get off on trash talking each other's ethnicity. The point is that I think as an allegory, I think Kneecap does a really good job of making the band the butt of an elaborate joke, where the whole point is that while generational trauma is certainly a part of the story, another part of the story is actually this kind of alienation from trauma, this feeling of this peace baby generation being shackled to the very assumption that they should feel traumatized and paralyzed and defeated, as opposed to, just kind of living their lives as all kids want to do and deciding what Irish identity means to them and the sort of culture that resonates with them and how they would rather mediate these prevailing controversies of independence versus unionism, Irish versus British, Catholic versus Protestant. With Chara's relationship with Georgia obviously being a part of this satire of the character, but also growing into this kind of beautiful, cute vindication of this idea that these two kids don't have to be bound by all that stuff, that even if they themselves find themselves acting out these 30 years antagonisms, they can do so in a way that still ends with them both figuratively and literally coming together. And I guess that's sort of both the greatest strength, but also the most formulaic weakness of Kneecap, because on the one hand, it is full of all of this very lurid content. It is this very colorful and stylized film with Pepiot and cinematographer Ryan Kernaghan seeming to take some not unsubtle cues from Danny Boyle's films. There are some shots and sequences that even seem to be direct homages to Trainspotting. But on the other hand, it is kind of formulaically twee in the way that I think is very typical of commercial film coming out of the United Kingdom at the moment. The film's climax is really quite exciting, but how it all wraps up was just a tad bit too wholesome for me. I really would have liked the filmmakers to push the darker comedic subject matter a little further, to try to test the boundaries of uncomfortable conclusions a little bit more. But I guess from an activistic point of view, they wanted to go out on a more feel-good note, and not even so much just in terms of the band and its continued success, but in terms of, again, the broader real story of the film, which is allegorical for the prevailing of the Irish Language Act and the band as just one part of this new moment for Northern Ireland as passion for the Irish language hopefully continues to grow. Obviously, there's going to be a major hang-up if you don't find yourself particularly fond of Kneecap's music. As a new inductee myself, I was really quite fond of much of what I heard, but I think, like a lot of music biopics, even without a lot of experience with the group, you can tell when there's kind of a greatest hits quality to the soundtrack cues. Again, this is presenting a condensed version of the band's career, so despite the fact that it's supposed to take place in 2019, this is a band that recorded their first single in 2017, but it also includes music that they only released in 2021. Honestly, in the context of a film like Kneecap, I think it might have been better to not let us get so tired of hearing one band band's music over and over again. And maybe the filmmakers missed out on an opportunity to more staunchly amplify other voices in Irish contemporary music, whether it's hip-hop or club or whatever, at least to give the soundtrack a little more diversity, and so we don't reach that inevitable point of, okay, another recording session sequence. As far as performances, I do think the band does a fairly good job of portraying these semi-satirical, outsized versions of themselves, though I do have to say, out of the lot of them, DJ Prove turns out to be a really good, sensitive performer who I hope this isn't taken the wrong way. With the character he has to play out of all the group, in contrast to Bap as this bastard child of a militant political dad, or Chara as this sexual maniac, I feel as though DJ Prove just kind of naturally stands out because he seems like, out of all the band, he seems like he actually is acting as opposed to just performing. So I just thought, especially in a movie where he's working alongside Michael Fassbender, I thought I'd give my man a shout out, because honestly, bruv, first real acting performance, you're kind of running laps around Fassbender. Like, bruv, you're doing a good job. Good job, DJ Prove. And obviously, for non-Irish or non-Irish speaking viewers, there's the novelty of this being a film that is not predominantly but heavily in the Irish language that's making its way to major multiplexes in the United States. So there is that extent to which the film is just compelling to watch and also well crafted for both Northern Irish and international audiences in terms of how it even kind of stylistically and structurally attempts to teach you the new Irish vernacular and even kind of acclimate you to understanding both Irish and Irish inflected English. Because while the Irish might be mostly subtitled, the Irish inflected English is not. And so the movie is sort of being very daring and sort of keep up the pace with you in terms of just saying, no, you can figure it out. Just pay attention. Put your head in this space. We helped you along a bit. Now you really got to try to understand everything without literally understanding every word, which I think is entertaining and fascinating in its own right. I think I'm going to give Kneecap a 3.5 out of 5. A very delightful movie, and I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark. Way more worth your time than Deadpool and Wolverine or Twisters. Just why? Anyway, that about wraps it up, but tune back into this channel in a couple days when I give you my take on the second half of this personal double bill that I have done for myself when I review Coup, which, yeah, I definitely got some thoughts about this one. But yeah, thanks for watching. Sound off in the comments if you've seen this movie or are a fan of Kneecap. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? And if you did like this review, please share it, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and this was the New Movie Diary. I'll catch you guys next time. I've been recording for a half an hour and I still haven't finished this.